Incredible. That's the only way to describe it. The word had gone out that the Jews who had been captives in Babylon were free to leave and to return to their homeland, Israel. Now, you all know why that was incredible, because Babylon never released its captives. But Babylon had been overthrown, and the new administration had said that the Jews were free to go. Only Jehovah could have been responsible for that. So, every family head had a decision to make: to leave Babylon or to stay behind. Now, you might say, there was no decision to make at all. That's not a hard decision. But wait, hold it. Most of the Jews had been born in Babylon, and most of their parents had been born in Babylon. It was the only home they knew. Their roots were there. And according to certain records, some of them had got prosperous. Some of them had got wealthy. There are records of Jews buying and selling precious gems and other luxury items. So, one says, I can't leave Babylon. My business partner is a Babylonian, and the business is doing really well, and there'd be no market for the products we sell in Israel. Another would say, my son married a Babylonian woman, and they just had a baby, our first grandchild. He's so cute, I can't leave now. So on the one hand, you have these material benefits from remaining in Babylon. But on the other hand, the ability of the Jews to worship Jehovah freely was severely limited. So you had material advantages to staying, but the spiritual blessings that awaited those who chose to leave were going to be immense. And for spiritually minded Jews, it was no contest.
For spiritually minded Jews, it was no contest. Wow, what an interesting talk we're watching. This is David Splane, governing body member. He's taking us through a talk titled The Way of Holiness. It seems David Splane just can't get enough of this particular element of Bible history or the Bible narrative, namely the idea of Jews being captive in Babylon, subsequently returning, even though it was apparently in Babylon where they got greedy and learned the art of buying and selling.
We have the example of the Jews who were returning from Babylon to Jerusalem. Now, captivity in Babylon wasn't as harsh as slavery in Egypt. Jews in Babylon could build a house, run a business, plant a vineyard, get comfortable in life. Some of them even got rich. Scholars believe that it was in Babylon that the Jews learned about the art of buying and selling, trade and commerce.
That was David Splane speaking a year previously at the Always Rejoice convention, perpetuating this stereotype of Jewish people as being preoccupied with trade, commerce, and getting rich. How dare Jewish people get rich? How unthinkable. Before they were in Babylon, they didn't know anything about being rich. They didn't know anything about buying and selling. They'd look at money with this bemused expression on their face, thinking, what is this? What am I supposed to do with this money? They had no clue about running a business or keeping their finances in order. Only when they went to Babylon did they start to succumb to the snare of riches and become wealthy. I've said it before and I'll say it again. What David Splane said, certainly at the Always Rejoice convention, was perpetuating an anti-Semitic trope of the Jewish people. And I find it interesting that he seems to be so obsessed, again, with this particular aspect of the Bible narrative. This whole idea of the Jews going into captivity in Babylon and somehow becoming corrupted while they were in Babylon, and then having to return but deal with these Babylonish traits that they'd picked up. So in this particular talk, again titled The Way of Holiness, he's appealing to a verse in Isaiah that describes a highway of holiness. And just so we don't have to watch the whole thing, let me just describe roughly his argument, or roughly what he's saying here. Allow me to paraphrase. This part of the talk, he's establishing this idea of people going ahead and creating the path for others to follow, as they did when the Jews were returning from exile. It wasn't as though Isaiah's highway of holiness was a literal highway, was like some kind of asphalt dual lane system with like infrastructure and service stops and that kind of thing. It wasn't a literal highway. As he says in his talk, it was probably a case, and we have no historical sources cited, I should add, but what David Splane's saying is probably what happened is the first few Jews who returned to the Promised Land would maybe clear away a few obstacles on the path and make it a bit easier for those who would follow, and so on, so that progressively the way of holiness, the way for Jews to return to the Promised Land from Babylon, got a little bit easier for each group that would make that journey. That's the gist of his talk, and he's applying this model, predictably, to the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. But in so doing, as we're going to see, he's going to stoop to no small amount of historical revisionism and deception. He's going to try hijacking figures from history who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses and make out like they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And we've also seen here him drop clues as to how the governing body feels about the family arrangement. Because what did David Splane say in relation to material considerations versus spiritual considerations for Jews in exile?
Another would say, my son married a Babylonian woman, and they just had a baby, our first grandchild. He's so cute, I can't leave now. So on the one hand, you have these material benefits from remaining in Babylon.
Apparently, having a family is a material benefit. And if you're spiritual enough, you won't let family come in the way of spiritual things, of spiritual pursuits. That's the message I take from this. He's literally pointing to the example of a child being born to grandparents, and the grandparents wanting to stay with their new grandchild. And he's scorning that decision, this hypothetical decision, by saying, oh, the baby's cute, that's why we're staying. As though that's why people love children. As though that's the reason why a grandparent would want to be in the life of their grandchild. Oh, it's just because he's cute. Apparently that's how shallow and fickle and stupid people who care for their families are. I love the fact that the governing body are so insistent on putting themselves front center, not just on the JW broadcasting, but also at the conventions and at the annual meetings. They cannot get enough of themselves. They love the sound of their own voice. And I love the fact that they're given this opportunity to just mouth off with a microphone in front of them, because that's when we hear these little things dropped, these little hints dropped along their highway of stupidity that help us build a picture of how their minds work. And when I hear David Splane talk, I hear someone who is very small-minded, in my view, quite likely a very bigoted person, and certainly someone who sneers on the notion of family and sneers on the notion of, for example, grandparents wanting to stick around for their grandchildren.
Today, not tens of thousands, but millions of men, women, and children are responding to the command, the urgent command, get out of her, get out of Babylon the Great. And the situation is different from the situation of the Jews in ancient times because they had a choice. They could remain in Babylon and still serve Jehovah. But people today have no choice. They must leave Babylon the Great. Their life depends on it.
This is exactly what I was talking about. Please, let's hear as much as possible from these men. You know, if I could record every single word that comes out of the mouth of David Splane, if I could have like a full transcript available and be able to summon up the recordings of every word that is uttered from the mouth of David Splane, Anthony Morris, Stephen Lett, I would love to have it. I want these individuals, these charlatans, these con artists, to have as much exposure as possible, and I love the fact that they're indulging me, at least insofar as these annual meetings, the JW broadcasting. Let's hear your stupidity, David Splane, and let's hear you drop hints at how controlling this religion really is. We've heard him there confess that being a Jehovah's Witness is not a choice.
But people today have no choice. They must leave Babylon the Great. Their life depends on it.
People today have no choice. No choice. They must leave Babylon. They must leave Babylon the Great. Any religion that's different from ours, they must leave. They must turn their backs on it. Their life depends on it. Well, there you go. Need I say more? At this point, I can just play his words. I don't need to exaggerate, do I? I don't need to lie about what he's just said. I don't need to mischaracterize it in any way, shape, or form. It's bad enough as it is. If you're watching this as someone who doesn't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, you're just curious, well, there you go. It's a doomsday cult. They feel as though people have no choice but to become Jehovah's Witnesses if they want to save their lives, if they want to keep living. They'd better become Jehovah's Witnesses. They'd better reject any other form of religion. Their life depends on it.